Okay, cool. So let's start off by talking about privacy, right? Let's have a conversation about why we should really care about privacy and why is it so important and all that stuff, right? Okay, so basically, if you look at the questionnaire responses that we got, right? I think this one particular question kind of sums up the general feeling among you guys about privacy issues. So this question was about how concerned are you about information staying on the internet permanently, right? And you can see most of you are somewhat or not concerned, while only a very small group of you, the blue group, is very concerned, right? So we are hoping by the end of this presentation, not to scare you guys, but at least most of you will be somewhat or very concerned about your privacy, right? Because as you will see, there are things that are worth being concerned about. All right. So, what is privacy? Well, we kind of talked about this 2 weeks ago, right? Like we talked about, different definitions. There's all sorts of definitions. There's legal definitions, philosophical ideas. But I think a good way all of us can really think about privacy is two words: one, control, and two, trust. Right? It's basically the ability and right that you have to control what and who you share information. Right? So we and all of this is based on this idea of trust. Right, and we talk about how on in our day-to-day lives, we this is an important part of our interactions with each other. But for some reason, when we go online, we don't think about it as much, right? So, but because we tend to share a lot of information without even knowing it, right? Like we share photos, we share photos of our friends, we share our location, we share bank information if you have any. And this is where it gets really creepy. We also share what we like, but we don't like, our beliefs, our habits, right? So we'll really talk about, what's the extent of this information sharing and why we should at least think about it before we do so, right? So why is it important that we have control over this information, all these things that I listed out, right? And there's many more. But why is it important that we should have control? In other words, like, why is privacy important? Well, we've all probably heard of this. And it's basically this idea that information means power, right? And we're all living in the information age or whatever, right? So whoever has information, as in whoever has more information about you, has more power over you. And this idea needs to be kind of registered by all of us, right? That means whoever has more information about you has the ability to use that information against you, exploit you, abuse you, and do all sorts of bad things, right? So what kind of groups typically do this, and what type of groups could do this to you in the future? Now, you kind of sum this up into four different groups. First, companies, they usually do this for profit, right? And then we have governments who typically do this, to control their citizens. We have criminals who do this, to disrupt and steal and, like for their own self-benefit. And then we have everyday people like you and I also, who do these kind of things for various selfish reasons. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at each of these groups separately and talk about why and how they kind of use our information against us. Okay, so let's talk about companies, right? So companies, like especially these big tech companies, like Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, all these companies, they love your data and your information because that's how they make money, right? So like whenever you guys like use YouTube, Google Maps, Instagram, it seems like it's free, but you need to ask a question like, is it actually free, right? And if you drill down into it, you're actually paying with your information. And companies make money out of something called targeted advertising. And that's what I'll be talking about here, right? So let's talk a little bit about targeted advertising, what it is, how does it work and stuff, right? So targeted advertising, it all begins with cookies. Now, we kind of asked this question in the questionnaire, like, what is a cookie? Are you aware of it? And most of you didn't really have any idea or had like a vague idea, right? So I'm going to explain in detail what a cookie does. Okay, so let's say we have Pumi, right? And Pumi wants to visit a website, right? So this website that Pumi wants to visit doesn't live on her phone or her laptop, right? Typically lives on something called a server, which is another computer that's like halfway across the world. Right? And through the magic of the internet, she can connect with the server and access that web page, right? But usually this is a very slow process because every time she would click on that website, information has to be shared between her phone as well as the server, right? So to make it quicker, right? Because every time she revisits it, we want to make it faster. What this server does is it drops this tiny file called a cookie on her computer. right? And what the cookie does is it stores information about Pumi, right? Basically her passwords, her preferences, and things like that, so that every time she would revisit the site, it would make it faster, right? So this is something we do for convenience, right? Because if cookies didn't exist, the internet would be like really, really slow, right? And loading, and it'll be, like not convenient. So the thing is, these cookies aren't usually allowed to jump from one website to another, right? So if, for example, Pumi is visiting Facebook, right? Facebook will have its own cookie. It will drop this cookie in Pumi's computer. It will track her likes, her clicks, and all her other data. But the moment she goes to another website, let's say she wants to visit Nishan's famous fashion blog, right? All of you guys should actually check it out. So Nishan's famous fashion blog, Pumi wants to visit, but this cookie that Facebook dropped, right, usually can't go into any other website that she visits, right? That's basically a rule. But the thing is, now let's say Nishan wants likes, right? Like we all know Nishan's desperate for likes. So what he would usually do is he would drop a like button in his blog, right? He would say, please like my new fashion, statement or whatever. And the moment he adds that Facebook like, there's a bit of Facebook in his website. And the moment that bit of Facebook is in his website, that cookie that Facebook dropped can go into Nishan's website as well and track you across the internet. And that's what happens. And then it becomes what we call a third-party cookie, because it's coming outside of Nishan's website, right? But it's tracking Pumi's movement, right? And these third-party cookies are everywhere, and Google is like the worst at this, because Google services are in almost every website, right? So even if it's like a website that you visit, like I don't know, to like cute dogs or something like that, Google is still tracking you using third-party cookies, right? So does Instagram, so does Pinterest, so does YouTube, Wattpad, TikTok, all these platforms your kids are on these days, right? So the really creepy part with all of this is now what happens is this cookie is tracking you, right? It's tracking every single website that you're going to, and it's using all this information. And what it does is it creates a sort of a virtual profile of you, like a creepy puppet, right? That captures things like what you like, what you don't like, what kind of personality you have, what you believe in, things like that, right? So in essence, these companies know more about you than anyone else, right? More than your parents, sometimes even more than yourself, right? Because they have these really complicated algorithms that can even predict the kind of decisions you would be making. So what do they use this like creepy virtual you for, right? They basically use it to sell to other companies for advertising, right? And do this thing that we call targeted advertising. So what happens is essentially these cookies track you. They create a virtual profile of you. This virtual profile is sold to other companies. So companies like Google and Facebook would sell it to other companies, and they would target advertisements at you. So like, for example, if you kept going to websites about cute dogs, this is when you start seeing, like dog products all over your advertisements. You see dog shampoo, dog treats, and all sorts of stuff, right? We've all experienced this, right? And all of this happens because of this tracking cookie that's following you. So you might ask, like, why is this bad though, right? Like, if I like dogs, why don't I, like, it's fine. Like, I want to see advertisements about dogs, right? But there are three reasons why this is kind of problematic. First is that for the longest time, these companies didn't tell us they were doing this, right? They were tracking us without asking our permission. So on a very basic level, when we were talking about privacy before, we talked about trust and control. And this was a direct violation of that trust and control. Now, these days, you see that pop-up that comes out saying, do you want to accept cookies and things? That actually came out recently because of this EU law called the GDPR, which Sanjit will talk about in more detail. But even then, we just click it, right? We don't read through it. And now it's kind of worse, where we're sort of unknowingly giving them permission to track us, right? Secondly, the issue is they have a scary amount of information on us, right? Who we are, what our beliefs are, and all of that, right? So today they're using it to, sell things to us, but we can't predict what these companies would use it for next, and they've already violated our trust before, right? So this is a question to you guys, right? Are you comfortable with letting all these companies have that much power and information about you, right? And that's a very personal question that all of you, I think, should answer for yourselves and think about. Right? And then finally, another reason why this is bad is because, like I said, this is how they make money, right? So their incentive is to keep us on these platforms for longer and longer so that they can show us ads, right? So this is how these platforms become very addictive, because they're designed to keep it addictive and keep us kind of locked into these platforms. And that's another issue that we'll talk about in a later workshop. All right. So now that we talked about companies and why that should be a concern, let's talk about the second group, governments, right? So all throughout history, governments have, tried to look at new ways to control people, right? And let's think about a couple of recent examples. Let's look at China, for example, right? In China, there's cameras everywhere now, and all these really complicated AI, artificial intelligence software that can extract information from these cameras. And this video is an actual video, by the way, right? So in China, like even if you want to go to a shop and buy, say, a coffee, you can, pay using your face. You don't even have to take your wallet out. And that sounds very convenient. But the scary part is all that information is tracked by the government, right? So they know where you are, who you're with, and what you bought, right? Now imagine you had a disagreement with the way the government is doing something. Let's say you wanted to protest or you wanted create some sort of opposition. Now think about the amount of power that government will have over you when they know all this information, right? It's actually really scary. Another example was the Cambridge Analytica example, and I would actually suggest you read up more about this. This was a situation where there was a political strategy company that was working for the former US President Donald Trump, where they basically took those virtual profiles that I talked about before through Facebook, right, illegally, and targeted political ads at people. So they pretty much used all that virtual profile of yours to manipulate people to vote in a certain way. Right? And that's also really scary. And the crazy part is Facebook did nothing. They didn't even inform its users until it was kind of leaked and people found out. All right, so that's governments. And so we all should be very, very careful what we allow our governments to do. So the first step really is to prevent us from ending up in a world like that, is for us to care about these issues, to care about privacy, to make sure we push our governments to put regulation and laws that actually benefit us, right? And we also need to make sure everyone around us also care about these issues. Otherwise, we could easily slip into a world where we are tracked 24/7. All right. Then the third group are criminals. So now with online schooling and working from home and like everything's become digital, so has criminality, right? So we have things like phishing, where you get like a WhatsApp message where it says, or an email where it says like, congrats, you won a prize, or there's a Nigerian prince who wants to pay you gold or whatever. And then there's a link, you click it, and next thing you know it, all your information is taken from you. And you're screwed basically. Then you have things like ransomware, right, where criminals hold your personal information and your websites for ransom, and then tell you to pay it, or they'll leak it or destroy your information. We also have things like cyber physical attacks. So how everything is computerized now. Our electricity grids, our schools, banks, right? So it's very easy for hackers and terrorists to attack those infrastructure. Right? We saw this happen in the US last year, where they hacked into the US government. Our Sri Lankan government website was hacked this year, right? So it's a really scary world we are all moving towards, right? Where criminality is moving digital, and so are we, right? So we should be extra careful about our private information. And now finally, we have to talk about everyday people, and this is where it gets kind of scary, right? So first, we all know about creeps, right? I think all of you are smart enough not to share information or talk to people on the internet without knowing them, because it's really easy to lie and fake things on the internet. But then we also have our friends, right? And this is something we don't necessarily always think about, right? So I'm sure some of you might remember this, but a few years ago, there was this Dropbox link that was shared around, and it basically had pictures that girls had sent to their boyfriends, right? Basically pictures that were only meant for their boyfriends to see. And, people do this because they trust each other and care about each other. And it's basically an issue of trust. But when this trust was broken, it's worse than in a normal circumstance, because not only is your trust broken, all that stuff that you shared is now permanently online, right? So it's like double the hurt and issues that you're having to deal with. So if any of you are going through something like this, there are a few things we want you to think about, right? First, if something like this happens to you, first of all, you need to realize it's not your fault, right? The only person who should be blamed is the person who broke your trust, right? You need to keep that in mind, right? So the second thing is, if you feel like you're being exploited right now in some way and don't have anyone to talk to, you can reach out to us, especially Kimi in our team, and we will connect you with some professionals who can help and who you can talk to, right? And thirdly, and this is important, before you share something with even a friend or someone you really care about, someone who's really close to you, right? you should really, really think about it. Now, we believe that the final choice is yours, right? I mean, like, that's your choice. But just be aware of what could go wrong, and really think twice, thrice, 5 times if possible before you share things with your friends. Right. And then finally, we should also worry about ourselves, right? Like simple things that we do to breach each other's trust, right? Screenshots of conversations, oversharing information about you, your friends, without even thinking about it. That's also a problem, right? So we all need to start being aware of this, start talking about this with our friends. And we are really hoping that Reconnect Us would also create this conversation and that we can use it as a platform to start telling everybody in society about these issues as well. So having said that, I'll wrap up now and hand it over to Sanjit to tell you about what society is doing about all these issues.
Thanks, Mali.